And welcome to Literary Feck with me, Clive Davis, and
Nicola Khan, reporting for duty.
We talk about getting to character there, talking about books and such. And so we take it in turn. And this time, so we should point out this was.
I think this is very important that we explain what happened this time.
This is a little bit of a place.
So Monsieur Clive over there began by recommending a book called Phantom Africa, which is about 8 squillion pages long. And it is, from what I've read so far, very good, and we will get to it. But I have a job, and therefore...
I've told you not to do that, Nick, but you won't listen to me.
So then, as a way of meeting me halfway, Clive decided we would do a book called Manhunt, which is a collection of short stories from a magazine, which turned out to be 400 and something pages long. And also, I could not possibly read in time to do this. So, as a last minute meeting me even further in the middle, Clive recommended
The Rat Bastards #1, Hit the Beach! Exclamation mark.
I wonder if this was a passive aggressive response to my inability to read the first 2 books that he now said we do The Rat Bastards. So Clive, why don't you explain to us how you even discovered that such a series as the Rat Bastards?
You mentioned the Best of Manhunt collection, and I actually both came into my consciousness thanks to another podcast that I listened to. I know it's hard to believe that there's other podcasts out there, but there was one that's not bad called The Paperback Warrior. I don't know if you've ever given it a listen, Nick. I know I've sent you a couple of links.
No, but I have read articles online.
Right.
Because it's a magazine as well as a...
It's a blog. It's a blog.
A blog. Yeah.
And it's a spin-off podcast. And it's quite a fun podcast. There's 2 guys who do it out of Florida, and they cover vintage fiction and stuff. I like listening to them. Their tastes don't exactly align with mine a lot of the time, but I've gotten to know them well enough now after listening to enough shows that I can judge what my feelings on something is going to be in relation to theirs. I think that's the good thing about getting to know reviewers or curators about something is it's not necessarily that you agree with them. It's just that you know what your response in, kind of, if you imagine it geographically, if they're here, you're there, kind of thing. And then then you can decide, well, if that twat likes it, I'm not going to like it, or if they hated it, there's a good chance I would, or depending on their response, right? Yeah.
Sorry, I have to say that there's I read once, I think it was an interview with Jello Biafra, where he talked about, and if you don't know who Jello Biafra is, he was the lead singer of the Dead Kennedys, fairly important figure in punk music in America. But he once said that he used this guy who wrote record reviews for the Boulder, Colorado newspaper as if this guy hated it. So like for example, it was like the Stooges' first album, 1 star, like this is absolute garbage. It was like an opposite. He was like, if this guy hated it, there was no question that Jello Biafra needed to go buy it.
Right.
I think Patton Oswalt did a similar thing about the movie reviewer for his. He said, small towns, you really depend on having that stolid, reactionary person at the newspaper to tell you what it is you should be interested in.
Right. Or John Waters talks about the Catholic Legion of Decency.
Yes, making the best reading list possible.
The reading list, yeah. Anything by Grove Press basically is But speaking of oddly enough, another podcast I've started listening to recently, speaking of Boulder, is what's his name? Kulseth. He's the guy who runs the film. There's like a film series out of CU Boulder. And he does a podcast where weekly he has 20 minutes chats with Alex Cox. Alex Cox seems to be popping up a lot.
Yeah, he's becoming your my version of Lone Funk Up, I guess, for you.
He
another box to check for your bingo cards.
Anyway, so that's another podcast you might want to listen. Anyway, we're way off track. So there's one called The Paperback Warrior, and they both recommended the Best of Manhunt collection, and also recommended this. So it's a series of 16 books, the Rat Bastard series by Len Levinson.
Although not written under that name, I think.
No, John Mackey. John Mackey is the house pseudonym. And he also wrote, these are Pacific War. There's also another series he wrote called The Sergeant, right, which is the European.
But under another, he's a bit like Dean Koontz. He seems to have about 22 different pseudonyms he wrote under.
I think he has pseudonyms, and also he wrote for house pseudonyms, right? But I'm not sure. I should have probably looked this up, but I think are all the Rat Bastards his?
I believe so.
Yeah. So this is the first of 16, and they were recommended on that show. And again, I mean, like I said, I don't necessarily take all their recommendations as things that I'm going to like, but you know, the way this was spoken about, it seemed like something that I would kind of be interested to look at. And you know, I've heard of the Rat Bastards series before. I don't know if it was on your radar.
No.
You know, men's action adventure, series. And yes, so set in the Pacific War. Specifically, this first entry it's about the 23rd Army Infantry, right? And I guess it's so the real Battle of Guadalcanal, if that's how you pronounce it.
I think so.
Took place from 1942 August until February of 43, and so the Guadalcanal is in the Solomon Islands, right? So this is basically, fighting the Japanese, and I think it is considered one of those quite pivotal, massively brutal, theaters within the theater, the larger Pacific theater. And yes, so we follow this 23rd Infantry as they're kind of dropped off at Guadalcanal, and they have to, well, I guess the islands swarming with Japanese, right? And they have to make their way in country, and they're all pretty much green, right? All these people are it's like their first day in the army or something. And it's funny, there's quite a few, I don't know what Len Levinson's personal history is, but there's quite a few dig at the Marines in this book.
Well, so he was in the military, apparently, during the end of the Korean conflict.
Okay.
And it sounds as though, from reading about him a little bit, he didn't really seem to see much active duty, but there was a belief that at any moment they could be sent, like that the North Koreans might kind of kick up again. So it seems like the end of the Korean War, he was in Korea, and he did do all the training. So
just to correct you there, Nick, there is no end of the Korean War. It's an armistice.
Okay.
Carry on.
All right, sure, okay, all right. But in any case, so he does have some experience of what he's talking about here.
More than us too. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no question about it.
But
I still don't know what BAR stands for.
No, neither do I actually.
I should have looked it up.
I was hoping at some point it would become clear. And then I'd finish the book, and then it's fine. I got through it without knowing. I'm assuming it's not just a BAR. Right?
No, I don't think so. Seems like a weird thing to carry around in the jungle.
But he does have a few digs at the Marines, like basically, the Marines here, they weren't any good. And there's a few spotted there, so I don't know what he has against. But it's interesting, it's one of those things, isn't it, where nowadays there's this kind of image of the Marines, the elite of the military or whatever. But I suppose once upon a time there's an origin to that weird phrase, which we don't use anymore. Go tell it to the Marines, right? It's
right.
Like people say that now, and what?
What does that mean?
What are you talking about? Yeah. But apparently, once upon a time, it was some kind of derogatory term, like, I'm not sure exactly what, like, I'm not interested in what you have to say, so go tell those fucking Marines, like,
Right.
What a strange, archaic phrase. Anyway, so, yes, and but little do they know that the Japanese have a plan to shell the island from ships offshore and turn it into a kind of hell on earth, right? But basically this small cluster of rat bastards kind of dig in and not only survive but also kind of rule the day, at least as far as this book goes. I'm guessing the series continues with the further adventures of the 23rd Infantry and these characters.
Yes, apparently none of them die.
No, they all
despite the outrageously slim chances of that happening, given what's described in the book. Not a single one of our kind of the main characters that are introduced,
spoilers,
seem to manage to die.
Yes, which was kind of, in a way, kind of refreshing, because I was just waiting
for one of them.
And I was wondering which one it was going to be, because would they go for the obvious one, or would they go for the guy who's always reading from the Bible, or would they wrong foot you, and would it be like Butsko, who's like the Australian psychopath with an axe who just loves killing, right? Or Frankie LaBarbera, the
he was the obvious
mobster loudmouth, who I enjoyed a great deal.
I'm not surprised. I thought you would like, when I was reading the book, I was like, oh, I'm sure Clive's loving this guy. This douchebag.
I resemble that remark. Anyway. So basically it's a fast page turner. It's like 200 pages, balls to the wall, extremely violent anti-hero book from 1983, which you mentioned, from published by Jove. Yes, and I'd never read it before. It was first read for you, and I kind of dug it. I enjoyed it. How about you, Nick?
Okay, if we're gonna deal with it as pure raw like adrenaline, then
that's what I mean.
There's no way not to enjoy it. It's a compulsive page turner. Really, the middle of the book, and by that I mean like there's like 100 pages almost, where it's very hard to put down. Right. Where the kind of when things really kick off and the battle kind of starts.
The shelling is, when the shelling starts, that is actually quite nicely rendered as like a really horrible. I mean, as gung-ho as some of it is, I mean, that section really doesn't make you feel like you want to be there at all, right? I mean, no. Glad to be curled up on the sofa, a couple of milksops, reading it like us two, right?
And other things like it definitely continually comes back to the discomfort, like the number of times that people get bitten by mosquitoes and white ants and
centipedes.
It's just which is effectively done. Like every time you forget about them, it brings it back. Like, oh yeah, this sucks. Right. This is a horrible place to be. So yeah, I mean, in terms of just pure action, pure headlong kind of like gung ho, it's great. I mean, the characterization is fairly thin, obviously.
That's fine.
As you expect, it's hard not to read it and be casting it in your head. And so what my problem with that was, like, because the book itself and the setup, it's hard not to kind of think about it in cinematic terms, right? There's an element of the Dirty Dozen here, in that they're like, most of the guys in this squad seem to be screw ups of some sort or another, right? We have that religious guy who kind of moves from being earlier on in the story more. Well, I mean, there's this moment, right? This kind of fulcrum moment for him where he goes from being upset about having broken the commandment, right? Like the first one, thou shalt not kill, to deciding he's God's scourge.
Right.
And he's going to, oh yes, I've been appointed by the Lord to punish the Japanese.
Right. For their transgressions.
Yes, and then, we have this kind of super aggressive asshole Italian-American Frankie character, right? Who's just
He's great.
I mean, he's refreshingly unlikable,
Yeah,
right?
oh,
Like
yeah,
they
oh, yeah.
make no attempt to make him in any way
No.
sympathetic.
Because there's not even like, sometimes with these characters, they can't resist. There'll be a little moment where, I don't know, he rescues a kitten from a tree. Or,
Yes.
something. They show the lighter side of him, or he's not that bad. But no, he's an asshole all the
From
way through.
beginning to end.
Like even quite openly kind of suggesting that he might frag some of his fellow officers.
Yeah.
Just so he can have a nap, without someone bothering him, or
Well, and at one point when they're fleeing from the Japanese, he actually basically knocks over who is basically our main POV character, like Bannon, right? This Irish named Texan cowboy guy who's kind of the main lens we see the story through. He knocks him over and nearly gets him killed. He's a total liability in every way to everyone around him by virtue of his selfishness.
A good example of that, sorry, bring up Bannon, but a good example of how there is no respite in this book as well is that there's a few quite funny sequences where Bannon kind of gets a minute to himself and his mind drifts as he kind of half asleep has these kind of memories, wet dreams of being with an old girlfriend, which always end with like just about orgasm or something, and then he gets kicked up the ass by his CO, like, get back, like, that kind of thing. And it's like a real cold bucket of water moment, right? It's
Sergeant Butzko, who is amazing. But I will say that I mean, those two scenes jumped out at me because I did. I laughed when I read them because they seemed absolutely mandated by the publisher. Like, well, there has to be some sex.
Right. I know this is all about like soldiers.
A bunch of men on an island.
Yeah, but can't you fit in like
There's got to be 2 screw scenes.
Yeah.
There's no question. So I wondered. I maybe want to read the next one to see how he does this every time. He works in the 2 mandated, sex scenes into these books that take place.
Bannon remembers Ginger quite a few times
often
over the course of the series.
Or do we get to see the other characters remember their girlfriends?
There's another. Frankie LaBarbera does remember fucking someone in a broom closet and coming in their hair. That's another brief attempt at kind of sex.
And then there's also a girl who's in Australia who was particularly good at blowjobs, I seem to remember as well. So there's a few little moments, but the book is pure trash. On a whole bunch of levels, and that's obviously one that these completely extraneous dreamed sex scenes that kind of take place near the end of the book. But it's weird. I mean, it's well written in that way that there's not much that pushes you out.
No, right? It's not boring either. It's very propulsive.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like it's trash, but it's good in so much as it's trashy, but it's not. Like I said, it's not badly written. It's actually someone who can write. I think that's an important distinction to make. I think sometimes when we talk about trash, people who are not versed in trash might not necessarily understand what we mean. We're not necessarily using that as a bad phrase.
No,
it's trashy, right? Rather than it's rubbish or it's bad.
Yes. But I mean, I did have to say
in trash.
Yes, I did have to say I laughed when I was reading the interview with him where he was like, basically trying to, because I mean, this interview was on fairly recently.
So this is the one you're referring to. It's on the another good blog, actually, the Glorious Trash blog has an interview.
I'll see if I can bring it up here. But basically, he has to acknowledge the fact that the book is in no way, shape, or form. I mean, for example, the Japanese soldiers are never called soldiers. They're never called men. They're never referred to as human in any way. The word that's used over and over again is the word Jap, right? Which, is maybe historically accurate, but the book is, it's not written from the book was written from the point of view. If it was a POV first person book written by Bannon, okay, but it's not. It's written in the third person, right? So, one could question why you need to constantly, at one point near the end of the book, I actually got to the point where I was like, wow, it's actually disturbing my ability to read it, just because there's other words you can use. Like you'd read a paragraph and the word Jap will be in it 20 times.
Right.
Because it was this clear attempt to deny the Japanese soldiers any kind of humanity. There's this one moment where there's this nod towards like, oh, Bannon has this realization, like, I guess they're soldiers like us too, and I guess they don't always like their commanding officers or whatever.
It does feel like lip service, doesn't it, that moment?
But then he's immediately like, but God damn it, they're Japs.
Yes,
and they're not really
and
humans.
they started this, they bombed Pearl Harbor, and yeah.
And it's like, okay, so that's apparently we're not going to go any further with that idea.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it is like it is an interesting one to try and place. So, like you said, on the one hand, you could argue that yes, if you were, American soldiers weren't running around in the jungles going, get that Asian gentleman in the tree, quick, They were using slurs, and of course the Japanese would have been using, and the Japanese as well do refer to half your head has just disappeared off. This is a video podcast. Nick, you might want to return.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not seeing myself right now. I'm sorry. I'm looking at the internet. Is that better? Is this good?
Well, just put the camera back down. I think. Did you move? There we go. Yeah.
There we go. All right.
There we go. Terrific. So, but the Japanese as well have no respect for the Americans. They're constantly talking about, everyone knows American soldiers are crap and they get scared in the dark and all this stuff.
Right. Although this is written by an American author, right?
Yeah.
Who's putting those words in the mouths of Japanese soldiers.
Yeah, no. I see what you're saying, but what I mean is that weird. It's authentic to a point, and then it tips over into just being kind of I don't know, overly enthusiastic maybe is the right phrase. But then again, I don't know. I should have think about this. I read a passage to my wife who is in the terminology of this book a Jap, and she was able to she just said, well, I mean, kind of that's what I'd expect. So I'm not necessarily offended by it because that's what I would expect, if you see what I mean, of a men's paperback adventure of the early 80s, dealing in this theater of war. Like it's difficult to know where to draw I mean, personally, just from my point of view as well, it didn't make me put the book down in disgust, but then again, I kind of knew what I was getting into. Right. So, right.
But it's in that way, it seemed comic booky of like 2 decades before, right? And some of it really did, like, I mean, whether it was just the fact that like there's a lot of onomatopoeic sound effects, like baroom, or like there's like and then this kind of like the Japanese characters never get to say anything; they shriek everything.
Right. Yeah, right.
It will be like Banzai shrieked then we got stuff like buck-toothed, bandy-legged, slant-eyed. Like, I mean, to me it seems like 83 is a little bit late to still be throwing that kind of shit around, right? Like that kind of like egregiously racist. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the 80s were pretty racist. I remember the 80s.
Well, we're probably just around the corner from the paranoia that Japan's going to buy up America as well.
Well, yes,
I do come back.
I do, yeah, absolutely. I feel like there is that element at that time for sure when Japan's economy is doing well, and there is that fear in America that they're going to buy up. Yeah, sure, but it's just like that I don't know, just that's an element of that started to grind on me.
Yeah,
for sure. The denial of humanity.
I'm not going to make any apologies for it. That's. I think you would be foolish and whitewashing to totally claim, oh no, it's just a point of view. That's how they would have spoken. I mean, you'd have to call bullshit on that after a certain point. Kind of, it is what it is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And again, it didn't bother me. But then again, I'm not necessarily the person who's going to be bothered by that, and certainly I wouldn't recommend programming it in your Asia Pacific Studies course as reading. might not.
Yeah,
be a
I
good
would. I
idea.
mean, it'd be interesting to take your copy of it down to Yasukuni Shrine and
And
read
read
it
it aloud.
in Japanese.
Well, to be honest, there's a lot more racist people hanging out at Chesapeake
Yeah,
Shrine.
I'm well aware.
It might be a nice balance. We are straying into dangerous territory here, Nick.
But yeah, I mean, it's so I mean, it's a weird book. It's very much a product of its time, I think. And it was what made me laugh in the interview was he was, and I don't know, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He wrote 15 more of these things, right? But his argument was like, oh, I was pretty even-handed, like I tried to show it from the point of view of the Japanese soldiers as much as
both sides.
And I'm like, okay, not so much in that first book I felt, but maybe by book 4, maybe book 4 is entirely from the point of view of the Japanese. But it was, when you think about when was the movie made, the one with Lee Marvin and Mifune Toshiro?
Oh, that's
the 70s, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it's not like it was completely unheard of to not deny your enemy any humanity at all.
Even the 50s, right? Like some of the stuff Sam Fuller was like House of Bamboo and stuff like that, right?
And that, it's funny, Sam Fuller came to my mind when I was reading this, that and obviously The Dirty Dozen were the two things I thought that had to have been in part templates for this book, right? The Dirty Dozen, in the idea of this collection of weirdos, rough around the edges. I
would go so far as to say you're probably a bit that, I mean, at this point I'm thinking Dirty Dozen, it's like it's like fucking Genesis begat and then begat and then begat.
Yes,
I'm sure Rat Bastards was a few generations along. It would have been copying, there would have been, after Dirty Dozen, there would have been a certain amount of hard-boiled, unlovable characters, and then the characters got more unlovable, and then they got more hard-boiled, and then Rat Bastards is probably more specifically someone who knows more about this, publishing history, and who reads more of this stuff will know. Rat Bastards may have been a specific, like the publisher would have said, that other series, the
Hell Patrol,
whatever. Can you give us that, but dial it up like even more unlikable? And then this Rat Bastards was followed. The fucking fag end was like cockroach cocksuckers or something, something like that.
I'd read that.
Yeah, I would read
that.
That sounds pretty good. Speaking of which, then, so this is my next one. So I think we both kind of enjoyed this for what it was, right? I guess the feeling that this was quite a fun page turning.
Yeah. I mean, if you can if you can separate out the fact that they
but what
and accept it for what it was, which is high octane war porn, right?
Yeah.
Then it's very effective high octane war porn.
If you separate the responsible part of your brain, which has goodness and humanity and wants to warn other people,
and in my case lived in Japan for 10 years, and in your case lived in Japan for considerably longer than 10 years, and knows that not everyone in Japan is a shrieking hell-bent. And one of these things that fascinates me is this thing in this kind of fiction where, and I mean, maybe people didn't know, but we know now that many of the people involved in the kind of the suicide, whether it was flying planes, the kamikaze pilots, or the scoop frogmen who had
flying planes into the kamikaze pilots. Who are these? Of the kamikaze.
Yes, it was particularly high end. Yes. No, whatever it was, these suicide squadrons, right? Whether they were sea or sky.
Yeah.
That they were terrified, that they were plied with methamphetamines, right? In fact, that methamphetamines was the secret weapon of both the Allies and the Axis powers, right? That everyone was wired, which
including the Blitzkrieg squadrons, right?
So that to see, anyone portrayed it as a kind of being, you know, heroic, or else in this case, in the Japanese case, you know, this like, okay, they're completely, absolutely brainwashed into believing that they're dying for the emperor. It's kind of all bullshit, you know. I mean, there may have been some, and there's no question that the officer class in the Japanese army was awful, right? You know, we got plenty of stories from Japanese soldiers coming back about how bad that was. But like the idea that the rank and file, in the same way that the German army, you know, that the idea that the rank and file were all Nazis. Well, we know that they weren't. We also know that in the American army, they had segregation.
Yeah.
Right. While they were fighting against racism.
I appreciate what you're trying to do here, Nick, but I think the danger here is to apply the wrong sort of, like, I don't think this book is any way, shape, or form trying to set up a nuanced view, right? And
sure.
That was my question. Sure. If you take all that out of your head and all that, and you want to live side by side on pianos with people and all that, and just tap into the thrill-seeking part of you, did this book do the trick, or was it still lacking? Or
no, sure. In the same way that, like, you know, watching the last 20 minutes of Commando will have that effect, you know, in that it's almost a video game. And I mean, in that way, the one thing that pushes you out of the book is the fact that none of our lead characters seem to actually die, right? Despite the fact, and apparently this is an issue with the series as it goes on, from the reviews I was reading, is that your ability to suspend disbelief becomes more and more strained as the series goes on, because this bunch of characters is constantly in combat. I mean, most of the book is basically an endless fight scene. There's very little in the way of downtime. So yeah, at a certain point, you're kind of like, well, how are these guys surviving this?
That was my next question. Was I think I've more or less forced you into saying you did enjoy this book.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay, good. Got there in the end. But my next question is, are you going to continue in the rat? Because I was thinking this. So number one, my question to myself was, if I was reading this totally by myself and I wasn't obligated to talk about it on here, would I have finished it? Because I'm a very keen giver-upper of books, just because there's so many fucking books to read, right? And
it was short enough. It was short enough that and it was propulsive enough that I don't think I would have stopped.
If I'm in my cups on my balcony on a Saturday night and I'm reading, this would have been the kind of book that, depending on how drunk I was or what mood I'm in or whatever, I could have gone either way. Not to say I wouldn't have been enjoying it, but I would have, I get the measure of this halfway through and I don't need it more, or I might have gone ahead. And to be honest, I think either call would have been the right call. Like, I am glad I finished it, but also if I hadn't, I don't think I would have necessarily missed an important part of the puzzle, right? So, and then I was thinking, well, am I going to read any more Rat Bastards? And I mean, the thing is, they're all very cheap Kindles, I think. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to read one straight away, and I'm not going to put it on my book list, and I doubt we'll do any more Rat Bastards on here. But then again, you know, if I was in Jimbocho and I found an old paperback copy for 200 yen and it had a nice cover, I'd be tempted to pick that up, and then it would just be sitting there on my shelf, and one drunken night just looking for something easy to read, I might, you know, out of sequence, I'd jump straight to Rat Bastards 13, or, you know, I wouldn't. So that's how I feel. It's disposable in that way, and I suppose that's exactly what it's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be disposable, trashy entertainment, and for what its remit is, I think it's fairly successful.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it in that way that, I mean, for example, like I have read pretty much all of Stark's Parker books, right? And I do see them as related in a way. Like it's a serial fiction, right? With a kind of
but that's a different level again, right? That's,
I mean, it's better for sure.
Yeah.
But I do think
well, it's more compelling. I think the world of Parker and the character of Parker is more compelling in so much as I really want to know what this guy does in different situations.
Right. Yes.
And all that. Whereas I don't really care what the rat bastards, because they're kind of, I mean, as much as a recognizable as character as Frankie LaBarbera is, he, like you said, he's not exactly a, you know, it's fairly
one note,
fairly generic. Yeah. And I can't see him reacting. Pretty much his reaction to anything is going to be "fuck you," right? I mean, nothing else is going to change it. I don't think so. So I'm not sure if I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not sure if that comparison. I mean, there's levels and gradations of
right.
Like
there's hard boils.
Top end. I mean, right?
Oh yeah. No question. I don't know. It's hard to say. I mean, I'd be interested in reading maybe somebody else's take. So maybe somebody who's read the whole series and maybe would say, okay, yeah, you know, there's a really interesting arc that happens for some of these characters that it is worth sticking. Because
like
certainly
pick the good ones maybe as well. Like we were talking about with Flashman, right? Like we might not read all the Flashmans, but some of them we might.
But certainly Len seems to think, is that the same? Len or Lev? Len. Yeah, Len. He seems to think that you need to read all of them. I mean, obviously he's the author, but that there is a chronology, like that there is a continuing narrative here, right? And there is the feeling quite strongly of a setup at the end of the book, right? Like that basically they're going to be sent on another mission. They're going to become the recon patrol or whatever.
To that point as well, I mean, that's the other thing is when you're dealing in, so there's series and pseudonyms and house names and how it can be very, like you think about the Nick Carter Killmaster series, for example. I mean, there's no definitive Nick Carter Killmaster. I mean, it can vary within, we should probably do a Nick Carter Killmaster series. Yes. I'm kind of a fan of some of those books. But the one thing it did make me appreciate a little bit was it did make the name Len Levinson jump at a bit at me, because I was thinking, oh, well, let's see now if there was like, let's say I was about to approach, let's say there was, I mean, there's so many of these men's adventure paperbacks, but let's say I started like a new series, the Executioninator or something, you know.
Yeah, sure.
And I read the first one and it was rubbish. But I know there's like 200 in the series, and I'd be shopping around for, oh, well, maybe I should dip into, you know, number 75 or something. Len Levinson would be a name I might think, I might want to read his take on this, because I know he's at least going to bring it with a certain level, at least, you know, a certain standard of trashiness that is probably, you know, let us, and it's all relative, right? I mean, there's books much worse.
Oh yeah, no question. As I said, it was almost, I mean, that way that, you know, I can't remember who, maybe Stephen King said about Richard Stark that his books were like machines that read themselves, right? Yeah. Like you sit down and it's like you're done. You're like, holy crap, I just read a book in an afternoon. Like I didn't, and in that way, I read big chunks of this in one go. Yeah. Right, like 2-3 hours, and I was like, oh, I just read like 50% of the book, you know. Yeah.
To be fair, you did only have like a few days to read it as well.
I did, but even so, right. it wasn't a struggle or a strain.
No. I didn't struggle with it either. I was like, okay, I'll probably read 50 pages a day across 4 days, because I'm reading other things as well, as Nick alluded to, because I'm a glutton for punishment. And yeah, it didn't feel like I wasn't, at the end, I wasn't like fighting with sleep to get it done. No, you know, it was
not at all. No. But it's very sweary too, which was enjoyable.
Yeah. Mostly coming from Frankie LaBarbera.
Mostly, but not entirely, but yes.
No. In fact, there was one bit that made me laugh out loud, because it just seemed so, such an unnecessary, a character says, Frankie, you use too many foul words. That made me laugh. Just like, kind of bringing a knife to a gunfight kind of response there, right?
Yeah, there's also a very grisly, seppuku scene near the end.
Yes, that was quite well done. I have to admit that was. I mean, it wasn't quite Mishima, but it was. Oh wow, yeah, this is quite nice. They're going for the long term there. Yeah, like the whole thing. He was like in agony, and then he looked down, and he'd only gone like an inch, and there was already a bit of intestine sticking out.
Yeah.
No, it was quite grim and nasty, and especially then when because we should mention as well that our anti-heroes are properly anti-hero. Plenty of looting and
and killing people who are surrendering. It's just like there's no POWs in this story, like at all on either side.
No,
it's all just like kill or be killed. It's very
to be honest, I'm wondering that might actually be fairly close to the
historically accurate. Yeah. I wonder
too.
Sure
if there was many POWs, I could have. Now we might be wrong about that. Not our specialist subject. So I think we should probably stop there, right? I mean, we don't want to belabor the point.
Yes, yeah.
I think I'm done. Any final thoughts? Then I'll hand it over to you, Nick.
No, I think I've forgotten what I was going to say.
Nice.
Except for this, I guess, as I was saying, as I was reading the book, it was hard not to imagine it in cinematic terms, right? And so I started to kind of like.
Should I get my bingo cards ready?
Yes.
Mention any of the old favorites?
Who would I cast? Right, and then would I cast because a part of it, like for example, one character we haven't talked about much is Sergeant Butzko, who you mentioned before. It seems to be a stone cold psycho, who has had some traumatic experiences on the Bataan Death March, and has been so he seems to revel in killing Japanese soldiers.
I had trouble for some reason. I had trouble hearing his voice in an Australian accent.
But I don't think he was supposed. I think he killed an Australian, but I don't think he was supposed to be Australian. I thought he was supposed to be American. He'd been in Australia waiting to be deployed or whatever, and I killed a civilian there.
All right, okay, could be, yeah.
But I think he was supposed to be American.
Okay.
So initially,
because otherwise Russell Crowe.
Okay, yeah, that would make sense. I think for me, I was more like some kind of mashup of Telly Savalas and what's his face from Super Fuzz, Ernest Borgnine, like young Ernest Borgnine. I pictured like a solidly built, bushy eyebrowed maniac,
I was thinking, what's his face from Full Metal Jacket was already kind of playing Frankie LaBarbera, right? Who's the kind of hard-ass twat in Full Metal Jacket?
That was the other thing I was going to say that this book reminded me of. Although in '83, I think it kind of predates a lot of this stuff, but it reminded me a little bit of that whole '80s Vietnam kind of like Full Metal Jacket and Platoon and stuff, like these kind of just sketchier, uglier, angrier characters who are,
Yeah, well, I was wondering about that as well. Like, depending on which, I mean, I don't know if they just stay in this Pacific Theatre or if the 23rd Infantry go anywhere else, or I'm not quite sure where the series goes. But I was wondering, in a different, less sausage festy environment, I'm wondering if they would go into rapey areas or not as well, because that's not a thing here. But
right, yeah. Well, certainly Frankie seems like a piece of shit, so it's entirely possible. But yeah, I guess we'd have to, again, read the rest of them or not.
Which you never know. I might kind of accidentally slowly do over the years. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if I was, 80 years old and I'd ended up, I seem to have accidentally read the entire Rat Bastard series. I wouldn't be surprised.
Right. But yes, and then I couldn't help but see our lead, Bannon, our Irish named cowboy, as Timothy Oliphant for some reason came to my mind. That's sort of like that kind of cowboy-y, but also kind of like tired and like,
right.
Yeah. So,
Timothy Oliphant packed his trunk and said goodbye to the circus.
Yeah, anyway, if you like your books very one-dimensional, very action-filled, and extremely full of racist language towards the Japanese, then certainly Rat Bastards is the book for you.
Book for you. So that's
Yes,
a
yes.
big thumbs up.
I would have said like if you were a Nazi, but then in fact, you know, they are the Axis powers, so I guess that wouldn't work.
No.
So that's just confusing.
And I'm not sure how much we want to actively invite Nazis to listen.
That's
but
true.
then again, I suppose you could argue you can do more from the inside, right? So
right. And my understanding is that there's good people on both sides.
Exactly. I think that's the main.
According to
that ties in nicely with Timothy Elephant, because it's Trump, right?
There we go.
See you then. Bye.